November 1944, a captured SS Hauptsturmführer is led into a windowless room at Camp Ritchie, Maryland. 40 minutes later, he has confessed to 17 war crimes. No one has touched him. The interrogator across the pine table is 26 years old. 3 years ago, he was a Jewish teenager fleeing Berlin with a single suitcase. This is the story the Wehrmacht tried to warn its officers about in classified memoranda. It is the story the SS specifically feared, and it begins in a small American training camp in the Maryland hills. Camp Ritchie sat in the Blue Ridge foothills of western Maryland. Before 1942, the compound was a National Guard post with wooden barracks and firing ranges. That year, the Office of Strategic Services, the wartime predecessor of the CIA, took control of the facility. They converted it into the most classified interrogation training site in the American military. The OSS needed interrogators capable of extracting actionable intelligence from captured German officers, and the agency needed them by the thousand. The selection criteria surprised OSS leadership. Recruits needed fluent German, detailed knowledge of Wehrmacht regimental structures, a feel for regional dialects, the geography of small towns most Americans had never heard of, and the internal culture of the SS. The American military already had a population that met every requirement. The Ritchie boys were German Jewish refugees. Approximately 15,000 men passed through Camp Ritchie between 1942 and 1945. Most had fled Nazi Germany as teenagers in the late 1930s. They had watched their fathers arrested in Gestapo sweeps, seen synagogues burn on Kristallnacht, and lost cousins, aunts, and grandparents in the camps at Dachau, Bergen-Belsen, and Auschwitz. They arrived at American ports carrying suitcases and severed family trees. They enlisted as soon as citizenship allowed. When the OSS came looking for men who could interrogate the Wehrmacht, these refugees were already waiting in American uniform. They spoke the language of the men who had tried to exterminate them. They knew the street names in Munich, the beer halls in Hamburg, and the gymnasium curriculum in Frankfurt. They had grown up in those streets. Now they were returning to them with American bars on their collars. The technique taught at Camp Ritchie had nothing to do with physical force. American doctrine treated violence as amateur work. Violence produced unreliable intelligence, and unreliable intelligence was worse than no intelligence at all. The method unfolded over 72 hours. A captured German officer arrived at an OSS facility and was placed in solitary confinement. No contact, no information, no acknowledgement. For 2 or 3 days, the prisoner heard only the sound of his own footsteps on the concrete floor. Then the cell door opened. A young man in an American uniform entered, speaking German with a Berlin accent. He offered a cigarette. He mentioned the prisoner's hometown. He knew the name of the prisoner's secondary school and the Wehrmacht unit the prisoner's older brother had served with on the Eastern Front. There were no threats. There was no shouting. The American across the pine table had simply demonstrated that he knew the prisoner's life in a way the prisoner had not expected anyone outside Germany to know. The effect on trained SS and Gestapo officers was catastrophic. These men had been prepared to resist physical torture and had studied doctrines on surviving British and Soviet interrogation. None of it had prepared them for a 26-year-old American who discussed their childhood neighborhoods in fluent German. Walter Huppenkothen, a captured Gestapo officer taken into OSS custody in the spring of 1945, broke in 6 hours. He named every agent he had worked with. His testimony was later used at the Nuremberg trials. The Wehrmacht understood the problem by 1944. A captured German intelligence document from that year warned officers that any man who fell into American hands should assume all intelligence in his possession would be extracted within 72 hours. Inside the SS, officers began quietly requesting British or Soviet interrogation. They preferred the possibility of violence to the certainty of being known. If you want to see how that interrogation lineage continues in modern Tier 1 operations, our channel War Code covers Delta Force in detail. The link is in the description below. When the war ended, the Ritchie boys did not vanish into civilian life. Many stayed in intelligence work. A significant number transferred directly from the OSS into the CIA after its creation in 1947, carrying the Camp Ritchie methodology with them. In 1963, the CIA published a classified manual known as Kubark. Large portions of it read like a direct inheritance from OSS doctrine. The same emphasis on isolation, the same weaponization of personal knowledge, the same rejection of physical coercion as operationally unreliable. These principles had come out of the Maryland Hills in 1944, and they became the foundation of American intelligence practice for the next 50 years. The lineage continued into special operations. When Colonel Charles Beckwith founded Delta Force in 1977, he explicitly credited OSS doctrine as the foundation for the unit's interrogation and human intelligence training. Former Ritchie boys sat in on early Delta Force lectures. The methods they had developed in Maryland against the Wehrmacht were passed to men preparing to operate against Soviet and Middle Eastern targets in the Cold War. This raises a question American intelligence historians have argued about for 80 years. The Ritchie boys were extraordinary interrogators, and the archival record on their operational results is not in dispute. But they were also men who had lost families in the Holocaust, men who sat across the table from officers who had served in the machinery that killed their relatives, men with every imaginable reason for private vengeance. Some historians argue that personal trauma made them sharper. They understood the SS from the inside because they had grown up inside the same society, and they could read those officers in a way no career American intelligence officer ever could. They knew when a German was lying about his unit because they had heard the same dialect in their own schoolrooms 20 years earlier. Other historians argue that personal trauma made them dangerous. The motivation ran deeper than patriotism. They had scores to settle, and the quiet room at Camp Ritchie was a place to settle them without ever raising a hand or leaving a mark. The question has never been cleanly resolved. Tell me what you think in the comments below.